Hello everyone. Today I'm making this beautiful, yummy, delicious loaf of cranberry nut bread in my bread machine. You can tweak this recipe if you want to and add in raisins or dates instead, or whatever add-ins you'd like. I used dried cranberries and walnuts, and of course you can use any nut you want as well. So to get started, let's add 1 tablespoon of oil, that's about 6 grams. And what I like to do is pour the oil over each of the spindles in my bread pan where the paddles go. My model has 2 paddles, and it's just my way of keeping it well oiled at the same time. Then I add 280 grams of water, and that's about 1 cup and 6 tablespoons if you're measuring that way. But using a digital scale is really the best way to bake bread. Oops, I just realized I forgot to put the paddles back on the spindles. I usually do this after I've poured the oil in, but before the water. Okay, let's get those paddles on. Next comes the honey, and that's 60 grams of honey or 4 tablespoons. So that's the liquid ingredients, and I'm following the bread machine's instructions to first add the liquid ingredients. Next comes the dry ingredients. So let's add 440 grams of all-purpose flour. That's about 3.5 cups of flour. And then 60 grams of rolled oats, also called old-fashioned oats. That's a 1/2 cup of oats. The oats add a subtle, nutty flavor profile to the bread, as well as creating a softer inner texture, and some extra fiber too. Next is 9 grams of salt, about 1.5 teaspoons, and then put that in the corner according to the bread machine instructions. And last, but certainly not least, make a little indentation in the middle of all the dry ingredients and add into it 2.25 teaspoons of active dry yeast. That's about 7 to 8 grams. Now, because my machine has 2 paddles, sometimes it's tricky getting the bread pan in. What you have to do is make sure the spinners at the bottom of the machine line up with the spinners on the bottom of the pan, and then it snaps in pretty easily. Okay, I set this on menu item 1, which on my machine is the basic bread function. And then for loaf, I set it to 2.5 pounds and the color medium. After about 50 minutes, the second kneading cycle started, and I checked the consistency of the dough. This is what it should look like. It's not overly sticky, but not overly dry either. Pinch and then separate your fingers, and the dough should come off from one of the fingers and stick to the other, but still have a little resistance in separating off your finger. If the dough seems too dry, then add a teaspoon of water at a time, a very small amount, until you feel the dough has some moisture in it. On the other hand, if the dough is very wet and not coming together, then add a teaspoon of flour at a time until it feels just right. So the dough looks good here, and I wasn't sure if I missed the add ingredients beep. I guess I got distracted, so at this point I added in the 1/2 cup of cranberries and 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts. It turned out to be a tad too early, and the cranberries got shredded a bit, but it was still fine. Here you can see the way this loaf came out when I added the mix-ins in too early. And now compare that with this loaf when I was paying attention and added the mix-ins at the right time. You can see the cranberries are more or less whole in one and cut up or shredded in the other, but it didn't seem to affect the nuts, only the fruit. So the machine is smashing and ripping all the cranberries apart, and now the machine just beeped, and so this is when I should have added the fruit and nuts in. Oh well, that's what happens when I get distracted. But still, the bread came out tasting just fine. And now the machine just beeped again, and that's to remove the paddles if you want to, and I want to. That's one, and that's the other. And you can see the cranberries are smashed a bit. Not too bad, but I definitely could have waited to add that in. And now I decided to reshape the loaf to distribute it more evenly in the pan. Sometimes the loaf is a little misshaped if I don't do that, and it's easy enough to take it out of the pan and shape it a little better. This is before the second rise. Obviously, you don't want to do this once it's rising for the last time. There we go, all good. In the meantime, I mixed up some brown sugar and cinnamon to spread on top. Sometimes I mix it in with a little oil to help it spread better, or even with some egg. Either way, just to give a nice topping to the bread, totally optional. The loaf has already started baking, and with about 30 minutes left on the timer, that's when I brush the top with whatever I want to. In this case, the brown sugar and cinnamon with a little oil. You can use butter too, and maybe more than I did here. In this loaf, you can see the topping is more evenly distributed. This is where I used an egg mixed with brown sugar and cinnamon, or you can just leave the top plain, whatever you want. And now you can see a time lapse of the rest of the baking process. And let's have a look. And it looks done. But then I decided to bake it a little longer. So to do that, you choose menu item 14 or whatever number bake is on your machine, and then select the time you want to bake it some more. Here I chose 30 minutes, and I think that was a little over for the outside crust, but the inside of the bread turned out to be moist and delicious. And once the bread is out of the pan, then let it cool for a bit on a wire rack. And now look at that. The inside looks as good as it tastes. Here's another loaf that I did. This time I waited until the beep for the add-ins, which is about 5 minutes before the last knead cycle ends. And you can see in this loaf, the cranberries are more whole. Both tasted pretty much the same, which was delicious. You can add in other mixtures using this same recipe. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I appreciate that. And thanks for watching. Bye.